afternoon, everyone. You have to make me a promise. If you hear my stomach growl, you didn't. I'm looking forward to lunch. But I'm so excited to be up here on the stage today to talk with you all about all things employee survey. We had a fantastic session earlier this morning with Bar Taco, starting that conversation. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper on that today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Augustin. I work with SMG. I'm our Director of Employee Experience Solutions. So I get to work with all the fantastic people in this room, like you, across a bunch of QSR brands, other restaurant brands, retail, and services, sometimes in the grocery space. But what we really focus on is employee feedback from the front line, which is often a hard group to get at. So what we're going to talk about today are a couple strategies for seeking that employee feedback. Once again, we kind of started that conversation this morning. What does that look like today? Is it still the annual survey? What can it evolve to? And thinking about that cadence, what cadence makes the most sense for your brand? What things should you take into consideration as you look to evolve your listening strategies? We're also going to talk about best practice for taking action. And specifically, I want to focus on frontline managers. Obviously, action planning should occur from the brand down, but setting those frontline managers up for success in today's world is really key. And last, I'm going to be joined by the man, the myth, the legend, who wears a cow tie sometimes, Nick from Chick-fil-A, to talk about how he's doing this in his restaurants today, to show you some real-world examples. So with that, a little bit about SMG. We are an experience management platform. So we collect both employee feedback and guest feedback, and we like to connect the dots across that. We've been doing that for about 30 years. We have evolved across those 30 years, so we've got a lot of things we can share with you on what we've seen be successful in the restaurant industry. One thing I want to highlight is that we are founded on something called the service profit chain. Now, you've heard what that means in many different forms already at this conference. But basically, what it says is that happy, engaged employees, they're going to be less likely to turn over. Those happy, engaged employees are going to have better guest interactions, which lead to more loyal customers, which, as you all know, leads to better financial performance. So it's all great to talk about this, right? But what does that actually look like? When we look at this across our clients that collect both employee feedback and guest feedback, those highly engaged clients, the ones that are at the top of our benchmark for employee engagement, better customer scores. They also have better financial outcomes, just like I said. But this is the actual numbers attached to that. And I'm a statistician at heart. I started as a research analyst at SMG 8.5 years ago, so the numbers to me really make a difference. But I bet, yeah, so that's across clients. What would that look like for me? If I need to go to my executive team and tell them this is what it's important, why it's important to collect that employee feedback, I want to know a little bit more. So I've got a blinded case study here from one of the clients that we've been collecting with over the years. It's not Chick-fil-A, but it is a QSR client, and they are a nationwide brand. And on the left here, or I guess, yeah, that would be your left, a little confusing. We've got the blue bars represent the disengaged restaurants for this brand. The green bars represent the highly engaged restaurants for this brand. And you can see that guest perception impact. In particular, you look at speed, that's an 11 percentage point difference. And that's just guest perception. We often tie in like timer and speed data to this type of research, and it's the same thing. So it's not just perception, but those highly engaged teams do knock it out of the park. On the flip side, for those of you in HR, I bet you're really concerned about the turnover side of things too, right? Same client, same restaurants. Those highly engaged locations have 22% less turnover on average. That nets out to those highly engaged restaurants costing the brand $1.1 million less across the year. That's huge, right? But the question here is, what difference are there between these two groups? What really sets those highly engaged locations apart beyond being highly engaged? You can't get that information if you're not soliciting some type of feedback. And there's 1,000,001 ways to get that feedback. We're obviously one of the vendors that does that. But there's such great technology out there. There's so many different ways you can get that feedback. But what is the right mix? What's the right channels? What should I be doing as a brand? As we heard earlier from Bar Taco, the annual survey, that's not quite enough anymore. you gotta take into consideration both point-in-time surveys and some continuous channels to really get the best mix. Now, I've been with SMG for 8.5 years. I've seen just about everything under the sun in terms of cadence, the different ways you can do this. I will tell you as a recommendation, as a best practice, like the bare minimum you can do, you need to be touching engagement in some way, shape, or form at least twice a year. Some of our brands that see a lot of great momentum do that more, but they had to grow to that. They had to get kind of the wheels in motion before they could get that higher frequency. But they also pair it with some type of continuous collection. Now, we heard earlier that can be something like getting a survey at the end of the shift. We see a lot of action happening around the onboarding space. That could be, first, third, fifth shift check-ins as they start their journey with you. Could be 30-day check-in, whatever makes the most sense for your brand. But getting that feedback at the start of the journey can be key to keeping that new talent as you get them in the door. On the flip side, you could be doing it on the exit. You can be collecting that information to get the macro trends on why they're leaving, because you've got good turnover, you've got bad turnover. For the turnover that's occurring for things that your managers can control, that's what you want to focus in on and understand what those trends look like. You can't get that information if you're not soliciting it. So what we recommend, touch engagement, do a couple engagement surveys a year, one way, shape, or form. If you can do more, great. But make sure you're combining some of this continuous data as well to get some of that trendability. So the question is, what is that cadence? How often should I be asking my employees for feedback? How do I ask those employees for feedback? What should I, take into consideration? There's a lot of different factors I want you to kind of look at and ask yourself as a brand to evaluate that. The first and foremost would be kind of your maturity in your journey of collecting feedback. Have you been doing this for a while? Have you been kind of setting the expectation that we are soliciting feedback at key moments across the employee journey? Do you have an executive team member or in your C-suite that's championing collecting employee feedback? I think that's a great pause. Can I get a raise of hands? How many of you have somebody in your C-suite or somebody on your executive team championing employee feedback? Great, I see some hands. Another question, how many of you all are doing at least 1 or 2 engagement surveys a year? All right, how many of you doing a continuous survey in one way, shape, or form? Love it. We want to grow that, right? That maturity, the more maturity you have, the more champions you have. If you have a cross-functional group, sometimes we partner with an HR department, sometimes we're partnering with marketing or with operations. What we find is it doesn't matter what department it lives in, but if you have a cross-functional group helping you pull that information together to be stakeholders, to put input into where you're going with your strategy plan, you're further along on that maturity journey. The more mature you are, the more frequently you can reach out to your team members because you're ready to act more, which gets into our next piece, readiness. How ready are you? How prepared are you to take action? Because we have a golden rule at SMG, do not ask unless you intend to act. Because if you ask and do nothing with the feedback, that's more harmful for you than not collecting feedback at all. And that's coming from a survey vendor, right? I'm telling you, make sure you act on this feedback. So when we think about that readiness piece, that's kind of twofold. Do you have the right people in the room as you look at the results of whatever feedback surveys you're doing? Do you have the right people in the room who can take action and implement something and implement it quickly? We don't have time to wait for 2 or 3 months. We need to do this on a quicker cadence, and to the point of we need to continue to evolve that, right? We heard it earlier, you don't have to have it all figured out right at the start. You just need to start taking action and be transparent about it. From a manager standpoint on your front line, you need to make sure you're setting them up for success. Do they have the resources to take action? Do they have the training to be able to put something together? Do they know what the goal is, what the timeline is? You gotta really make sure they're set up for success too. Once again, the more ready you are, the more frequently you can survey. And scope's pretty easy, pretty self-explanatory. Shorter surveys, you can do more frequently. Longer surveys, less frequently. But you gotta pay attention to getting the right data to take action. Because short surveys are great, and you can trend things out, but if you're not getting enough information to take action, you're gonna introduce survey fatigue. Because if your employees are seeing, hey, I'm giving you all this great feedback, but no actions being taken, they're going to stop responding. You're going to see a drop in response rate, and you really want to avoid that if you want to get good feedback and candid feedback from your frontline. So my kind of call to action for you all today is to take a step back and look at what you're doing from a listening standpoint and take those 3 factors into consideration. Is there more you can do in the next year, the next 2 years, the next 3 years to evolve your listening strategy, to grow your maturity and readiness, get the right scope so that way you can take action quicker? And as we talk about taking action, I want to talk about frontline managers. This is something that I'm so excited to share with you all today because we've been doing this for a while now. We've talked to a lot of brands, got a lot of great examples of what we've seen be successful for brands to take action quickly. And this is particularly on the frontline space. So as I already mentioned, you need to have those managers, those frontline managers, get them the resources. But what we really find is there's some great teams that put together all the resources. The frontline managers don't know where it is. They're not aware of those resources. That awareness is key, so make sure they know where it's at. Second piece is saying thank you. That's a manager saying thank you to their team members. Now I know that sounds very simple. It should be self-explanatory. When we do the research, we actually find that that doesn't happen all the time. It's actually inconsistent restaurant to restaurant. So making sure you're saying thank you and celebrating getting the feedback in and of itself. You can do this before the survey even closes if you're doing a point-in-time survey. You're saying thank you for this great candid feedback. The other part is being transparent and sharing those scores out. We heard transparency from Greg yesterday. That is also big. So you need to be transparent about the scores. You want to share your successes, but sometimes that feedback, man, it's candid. It can hurt. It's a sucker punch. But you need to be candid back to them. If they took the time to give you that feedback, you need to acknowledge it. You need to acknowledge those opportunities. Now, you don't have to have an action plan in place when you do this. You can talk about those because what we want to see next, after you share those results out, from a frontline manager perspective, is discuss and dig deeper. I would love to tell you that a survey is the be-all, end-all for you to be able to take action, but it's not. You need to have those one-on-one discussions with team members. Your managers need to host focus groups if they're capable of doing it, to actually talk to team members about their feedback. Hey, my recognition scores were low this time around. Tell me a little bit more about that. Why do you think that's happening? How's that showing up for you? How would you like to be recognized? Having those discussions and digging deeper will provide that additional context that allow them to create that action plan that's going to be more robust. Your frontline has some of the best ideas out there. They're your greatest resource when it comes to what you can do to get from point A to point B in Excel. So having that discussion in tandem with having those results can be super powerful as they go into the action planning stage, which is step 5 down here. So we often see the action planning occurs kind of at the restaurant leadership level, and that's it. What we really encourage you to think about is including frontline team members in that action planning at a restaurant level. What that does is it creates empowerment from the frontline perspective. They've got skin in the game. They're the ones helping provide what the steps are, what that SMART goal looks like for the restaurant to improve whatever their area of opportunity is. That empowerment can be key. When we see brands do step 5 right, by involving the frontline, we see scores grow a lot faster. The next part, once you get that action plan in place, once again, you gotta be transparent about it. You gotta post that somewhere visible. You gotta put it somewhere that you can refer back to on a regular basis. We see this frequently where engagement surveys or any type of point-in-time surveys, like a check mark, we did it. I'm gonna create this action plan and I'm gonna file it away. We don't want that gathering dust in a file cabinet somewhere. So we want to share that out and be super transparent about it because we are going to check back in on it and we're going to check in on progress. We don't want that document to disappear or wherever you put it. We want it to continue to grow and evolve as you get more feedback because once again, you should be collecting some continuous data in there too. So checking in that frequently, reevaluating it frequently because you might actually find that you knocked something off your list. Maybe you knocked it out of the park for recognition. Now it's time to focus on the next item. Or let's say, hey, we didn't really move the needle on recognition like we thought we would. Let's take a step back, let's reevaluate our action plan. and do something different, because we don't want it to be stagnant. We don't want to just say we're going to do something, let it disappear, and not check in on it. When we think about the progress check-ins, we want those to be at least quarterly to reevaluate, to check in on them. Ideally, your restaurant managers are having those results and checking in on that progress on a monthly basis. It is an agenda item that they make sure is dedicated, that they check in on. Because to point 8, we want to make engagement and any type of employee experience feedback a conversation that occurs across the year. We don't want everything to stop 2 months after whatever point in time survey we collected. We want it to be a dedicated agenda item going forward that's referenced to continue to evolve. When brands do that right, when managers do that right, we see such great gains. We can see that turnover impact at a greater rate. And that's kind of what we've seen in terms of what other brands have done, what we've seen be successful from a frontline manager perspective to really make sure that we're moving that needle with whatever type of employee feedback you're collecting. Once again, all great for me to set up here and talk about it as a vendor, but that's why we are so blessed to have Nick join us from Chick-fil-A. And Nick also brought cows.
Hey, buddy. When cows fly, right? So
It's like, do you do birthday parties too? Because you
yeah,
know
seriously.
you might get booked.
Yeah, no kidding.
So Nick is going to be super fantastic and share with us what he's doing in his restaurants today. We partner with Chick-fil-A to collect their employee surveys or their team member surveys. And I've had a chance to connect with him in advance of this, and he's doing some really great things. I know you probably heard from his session yesterday some of the fantastic work he's already doing, so excited to learn more from him. So Nick, if you don't mind telling us what you're kind of doing today to get employee or team member feedback from your front line, both from like kind of survey perspective and a discussion standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we partner with these guys, and we've been very happy. By the way, in concert or conference tradition, losing my voice, so bear with me. But we love the data we get from the surveys, and yes, once a year or twice a year isn't enough. So, but beyond that, in almost all of our restaurants, we have some kind of HR support, whether it's a captain or a specialist. And you might be thinking, well, we can't do that in our restaurants, but you can. So in our smaller format restaurants, that person might do 20 hours of HR and 20 hours of what we call operations, right? And another big thing we do is that all of our leaders at all levels, including myself, we spend a lot of time in the restaurant, but we're not just in there officing out of the restaurant. I make a mean milkshake, right? I'm doing the work side by side with the team, and they're not afraid to tell me, right? Or I'll ask them, like, hey, what's the deal? Like, this equipment feels like it's not working very well. Oh, yeah, that's been like that for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, like, right? Like, that's unacceptable. So we have to be in the restaurant because that's where our team is. That's where our customers are. And then our shift leads, they fill out an end of shift report, and they just tell us, is it good, bad, ugly, what's going on? And the most important thing is when we get that, we got to do something about it. If it was a great shift, like, hey, why was it a great shift? What happened? Was it the right people? Was it leadership? What was going on? And if it was a bad shift, why? Did we not have enough people? We had 3 buses show up. We had equipment down. Like, what was it? And then how do we solve the root cause of the problem, right? Like, because sometimes, and we're guilty too of going, yep, Friday nights, it's just hard to get people on Friday nights or whatever it is. But okay, well, let's fix it. How do we fix it? So a couple different avenues that we use beyond the survey.
Yeah, I love it. And I've worked with a couple other brands, including Chick-fil-A, have done something where they have that dedicated person in the restaurant who's going to champion this, much like how I mentioned having that C-level person or that executive person championing it. Having somebody in the restaurant champion it as well, in addition to your general manager, is fantastic. We can see a lot of movement there. We see better response rates. We see better scores, primarily because they're probably already focused a little bit more on the employee side of things with having that type of role. But it's just encouraging to see what, growing the responsibilities of team members to do that. We all know general managers are busy. Your store managers are super busy. They need that additional help sometimes. The next piece kind of leads into that, especially having that dedicated person. How do you prepare to collect, like from a traditional survey standpoint, to set yourself up for success for response rates?
Yeah, so we definitely encourage our HR teams to get their teams fired up about it, the store teams. And what we found to be the most successful, which is so simple, we take this massive poster and put a QR code on it, and we save the QR code for really special occasions. So engagement survey, holiday party, the big ones, right? So we use the QR code to let the team know, hey, we have the survey happening, and it's a limited window. And then if you have multi-unit, we kind of have some healthy competition between the units and say, in terms of participation rate. Those are two of the big things. And then in the restaurant, we have a space with an iPad or a laptop and say, hey, can you have 10 minutes to tell us what you love about working here, what we could do better. So those are a couple of things we really do. But the competition really helps, and then using that QR code, making it has to be simple, right? The team's busy, the work is hard, and they're like, what, is this another survey? Is it a new one? Are we doing the follow-up, right? So just keep it simple, basically.
Yeah. A lot of what we do when we work with our clients is try to meet the employees where they're at. So integrate with something that they're already using. Chick-fil-A is really familiar with QR codes. They've kind of got the dedicated space to take the survey. That's all fantastic. Having that friendly competition, also great. As you're thinking about your programs, think about where your employees congregate from a digital standpoint as well as from a physical standpoint. Try to interact in a couple different ways, as we've learned. Accessibility is key. There are some people who are going to be great, QR code, or great, I'm going to take this survey through my LMS system or whatever. But there's some people who are maybe not going to go that route. So having multiple channels to really make sure you're capturing as much feedback across as many different ways as possible is always going to be great. So let's pretend we've collected all this feedback, we got all this great information. How do you currently action plan within your restaurants?
Yeah, so this is the piece I'm most passionate about. I've worked for in other spaces where we did all this work, we got the survey, we got the data, and good data too, quite frankly, and then we didn't do anything with it, right? Or when we did, it took way too long. So once we have the data, I set a kind of goal of, hey, we have 10 days to sort through this, and then we have to take action, basically. So the things that we do, we say, what were the 3 things that we felt were like wins for us? What are the 3 wins? What are the 3 opportunities? And then we do that with the data, and then the comments. The comments are my favorite part. I stay up nights reading all the comments because I think the team is really candid there, and that's where you get to dive deeper. So once we have all of that data, the 3 wins, the 3 opportunities, and then what are the themes from the comments? We have to take action on it. So what we've done, we've taken a 6-week program, and we just tell the team, we use Slack, we make videos and say, hey, here's what you said is working, and we're going to keep doing that. We're going to try to double down. And here's what you said was an opportunity or you didn't like, and here's what we're doing to address it. And it sounds simple, but it has to be timely, and you have to educate the team on what you're doing, and you have to do it. So one thing that we found was probably 40% of the feedback or challenges the team gave us, we were already doing it, or we had a solution for it, but the team didn't know where to find it, or they thought it was a one-time program. So what we did was we have this website, like a team kind of resource, where we pulled all that stuff together. Where do I see my paycheck, and how do I put in vacation, and where are the benefits at, and when is open enrollment? We had all these platforms, and we still do, but now it's in one space. So kind of getting credit for stuff you're already doing is good. And obviously, there's a lot of things that you need to do, new or different. And then there's some things we can't do or we can't do right now. And then just letting the team know, here's some suggestions you had, and those are coming in the future, basically.
Yeah. And I love when we were talking about this before the conference. He's got a great system set up in place where they do kind of a push for a while for one thing, and they pivot. So they're continuing to evolve. They're not letting it, happen and maybe a little bit of activity right after and just let it stop. They've got a really great plan in place to make sure that they're going to continue that conversation throughout the next 6 months or however long between your survey waves or whatever feedback you're collecting or evaluating on. So my last question here, what impact have you seen back to your team members, back to ROI? What have you kind of learned from this program?
Yeah, the impact on the team member, it has really enforced, like, okay, yes, this is a place I want to work. They do listen, and they take action on what we're saying. In terms of our leadership team, it just reinforces, like, yes, what the customer says, what the team member says, that is so important. And then another thing we love to do is kind of these smaller focus groups where we say, hey, this is what you all said, or this is what the segment of the team said. Like, what does that mean? How do we break that down? Because the survey is really good and the comments are good, but it's like static, right? So we had the team live there to tell us. So I'm a big fan of the engagement survey. I think you have to pair it with a lot of different avenues, definitely. But big yes for me.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick. Thank you,
My pleasure.
everyone.